Good evening, folks. This is Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you another episode of The Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the grand solar minimum. Welcome, everybody. Tonight we have a very special guest. Thank you for joining us. We have David Taylor from East Coast Weather on the line. Now, he has jumped into the limelight and in my spotlight because he is all over the news, especially out of Australia. Mr. Taylor, who runs East Coast Weather Facebook page. Hello. Are you there,
Hello.
David?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, give me a moment here. I'm just introducing you. Mr. Taylor, who runs the East Coast Weather Facebook page, has correctly predicted major weather events in the past, including the recent Townsville major wet weather event and the exact path of Tropical Cyclone Oswald. And he has jumped into the limelight recently with his latest terrifying predictions that Australia could experience its coldest winter on record. And I can't wait to have this discussion with David tonight. David, you are obviously here. How are you doing over there in Australia?
Yeah, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine. Now, what got you into weather forecasting? I couldn't dig up any background on like what you've been up to.
Weather forecasting actually started for me at a very, very young age, and it's basically progressed from that. And unfortunately, Facebook came around, and from 2008 onwards, I've really got stuck into it.
So you just started your own Facebook page and you started predicting the weather using computer models that are available to the public.
That's correct, yeah.
And so what led to you being able to predict the weather better than the mainstream in your area? And now, almost every media outlet probably ringing your phone down here. I got you on the Daily Mail and like at least 5 other sources in Australia in the last 3 days quoting you.
Yeah, my phone has been ringing off the hook, and it still continues today. It wasn't until I've been studying sunspots since about 2010, and I've been slowly involving what the sunspot activity is predicting onto computer models on their own accordance, and I've been playing around with the formula for a couple of years now, and as each year goes, I seem to be perfecting it more successful as each year progresses.
Now, are you aware that the Farmer's Almanac that's been around since the 1700s also uses sunspots in their weather forecasting?
Yeah.
And is your model similar to their type of forecasting?
I haven't really looked into their forecasting, so I can't really comment on that one.
So we're both on the same page that we're headed into a solar minimum. It's going to last at least for a year or another year and a half. Our predictions here is that it may stay blank until maybe early 2022. There's no way to know, but we all know for sure that at least the next year or so, we should be at solar minimum cycle 24. And you're predicting a record winter in Australia. Can you extrapolate on your predictions for our listeners? Because one thing that my viewers on our YouTube channel cannot get in the Southern Hemisphere is a good weather forecast from an honest weather forecaster.
Yep.
So this is a rarity. So can you give our listeners a synopsis of your prediction for the coming winter?
Yes, I will. And I'll start from the beginning, so a lot of listeners won't get so confused. Well, basically, the sun. When it comes to the weather, the main source of weather, and I'm talking about thunderstorms, cyclones, hurricanes, tornadoes, is the heat. You take away the heat, and basically you virtually lose everything except for the cold and the snow. That's basically about it. Even then, that will even fall back because the heat brings a lift into the atmosphere, which causes the showers and storms, including snow. So you take the heat away, and you're pretty well going to mute the weather to a certain extent. But then you've got the Earth, and the Earth heats up from a few different areas. And we're looking at, the direct heat from the sun. We're looking at solar flares, and some people go as far as believing that CO2 also keeps the heat in the planet and actually helps the planet heat up as well. Now, what I find is happening is you get the sunspots, and when they're at their full activity, they are creating these solar flares, and these solar flares are adding extra heat into the upper atmosphere. And what happens is when we have the solar minimum, we don't have as many sunspots as what we normally do. So the heating in the upper atmosphere isn't there like it normally is, and we find that the upper atmosphere generally starts to cool. Now, a lot of people go, okay, fair enough, that's all well and good, but then how come summer is hotter than normal? Summer's always going to be there, and summer's going to be hotter than normal for a few other reasons. One of them is CO2, whether you believe it or not. And as long as the sun's there, summer's always going to be there. You're not going to take summer away. So basically, when the upper atmosphere cools, it doesn't necessarily affect the summers, it affects the winters. And with the upper atmosphere cooling down, I found that there's a link where it opens up the corridor for these big winter storms to develop. And these big winter storms really cause havoc and bring cold extremes to the northern hemisphere, which has already happened in their winter that's just finished. And we're seeing some evidence of it. It's already happening in southern hemisphere as well. We've already had one of these big lows that caused those winter storms in the northern hemisphere already develop a few weeks ago, and it passed through south of the continent of Australia and passed through south of New Zealand, brought snow to Tasmania and snow to New Zealand as well. So basically, as winter kicks in, it's going to open up the corridor for at least one of these, and this is what I'm worried about, one of these winter storms that we don't normally get in the southern hemisphere. We don't normally get these big winter storms that the northern hemisphere do. And so I believe we'll get at least one of these that's going to hit the Australian continent. And if that happens, then we're in for a very, very cold snap, something that a lot of people haven't experienced for quite a while. And it could bring snow to places that hasn't snowed before, and also it could bring snow where it hasn't snowed for a while. I did say that summer would last for an extra 6 weeks for the southern hemisphere, and winter would last at least another 6 weeks in the northern hemisphere. And yeah, it happened. And my biggest concern is now that we're starting to cool down, that will tend to continue, but I'm worried that we're going to get a big, hard cold snap very, very soon. And a lot of people will be, unexpected.
So tell me about the infrastructure. Well, first of all, let's go into the historical records of your area, because I am ill-informed, and I'm sure you know. So let's go back to the Dalton minimum or colder periods that you know about. I don't know if there was an Australian cold period back in the 20s, or can you tell our listeners what are things that haven't happened in the last few decades that have happened in the historic past? Have there been heavy snows in Queensland, let's say?
We do get snow in Queensland. It's more of the Queensland and New South Wales border. It does happen, and we only get a light dusting, and it can reach as far north. The last time it happened was in the 1956, I think it is 57. Actually in North Queensland, which is the tropics. It actually snowed west of a town called Mackay. There's a place called Youngla, and they actually had a light dusting of snow back then as well. We've even had snow in Ayers Rock, which is, basically in the middle of the desert. So, things like that, if we get one of these cold, one of these big winter storms, which I believe will happen, then, yeah, that's going to very, very likely happen again, and it could even be worse than what it has in the past.
1956 would be the solar minimum of cycle 18 going into cycle 19.
Yep.
So that would correspond with solar diminishment and then the outbreak of snow. So
That's
if
correct.
What you're telling me is correct, that the infrastructure of Australia is ill-equipped for any type of snow, like there's no plows or salt or any of that.
That's correct.
Are there regions that it snows regularly, that there is that? I know in New Zealand, Tasmania area, there is areas where it snows regularly.
Yeah, it does snow on and off all year round in the snowfields of New South Wales and Victoria. Don't get me wrong, it is unusual, but it does happen. But outside of that area, during summer is very, very unusual.
And let's get to some of the government regulations that are happening in your country that may prevent people from doing well in a cold environment. Can you have wood-burning stoves in your house? Is there lots of people with fireplaces?
Yes, a lot of people. The biggest problem there is where it normally gets cold, and I'm not talking about where it snows. A lot of areas that do get quite cool, quite brisk, do have some type of heating. But then when you get up towards North Queensland, then that heating fails. So if this does happen and comes to plan, like I think it will, then, most areas that will be ill-equipped will be more the northern part of Australia than, say, the southern part. Southern parts, I believe, in heat-wise, is pretty well equipped. There's some areas like southern Queensland where heating is inadequate, especially for a big cold blast.
There are no other government regulations that would prevent people from being warm then? Like, we have certain states here that you can't have a wood-burning stove.
No.
So if people didn't have money for the gas or whatever, they would probably be screwed.
Yeah. No, that's not the case here.
Well, that's good news. Now let's talk about, so your predictions, are they all short-term? Do you think this type of weather system will continue for an extended period for many years? Do you have long-term forecasting skills, or is that not something you want to...
There is what I'm concerned about is what's going to happen after this, and I'll get to that one in a minute. But what I have noticed, that after whether it's a brisk solar minimum or a long one, when the solar sunspot activity starts to pick up, for example, we had a low in 2008, 2009 here, and it started picking back up in 2010. And then in 2011, 2012, we had massive floods. The same thing happened back again in 1974, I think, and there's a couple of other dates as well. So that's a bit of a worry as well. But also what I'm worried is whether you believe in CO2, what I am really, really concerned about after this solar minimum happens is, now, we'll use a bucket of, if you get a bucket, for example, and you put lukewarm water in there, and just pretend that temperature in that bucket is the current atmosphere temperature, nice and warm. Now, if you get two other bottles, one slightly warmer than lukewarm, and another one that's hotter than that. So you tip the hotter than normal one in there, representing the heat from the sun, and basically tip a little bit in there, and you feel that the water will slowly start to heat. And then we know that, well, I don't know what your thoughts and beliefs are on global warming and CO2. Then you tip the jug in, which is accelerating the heating of the planet as well. And this is where a lot of people get confused. So you tip a little bit in there, and you'll notice that the temperature will heat up quite quickly. And that's what's happening at the moment. But then if you get a block of ice and represent that's the sunspot minimum, and you put that in the bucket of water, fresh, clean bucket of water, nice room temperature, and that represents the solar minimum. Now, if you tip the slightly hotter water in there, the water will slowly start to warm up again, but then it will drop rapidly, same as you do with the jug, which represents CO2. And as long as that ice is there, the solar minimum is there, and that keeps dropping the atmosphere temperature, and we're not getting an actual correct reading on what CO2 and temperature rises is causing on the planet until that block of ice, which represents sunspot minimum, is removed. When that's removed, and you keep tipping those two other bottles of hot water in there, then the planet's temperature is just going to explode.
So it's your belief that cycle 23 and 24 have been diminishing, and they've been masking a hidden warming that will explode as we accelerate up cycle 25.
Correct.
Interesting. Well, there's no evidence to support that, unfortunately. And the new model, the CMIP6, coming out currently being used by the IPCC, suggests that the next 10 sunspots are going to continue to diminish all the way through 2100. So the peak of 25 won't even exceed the peak of 24. So if you're thinking is that the temperature will explode as we go up 25, then the same thing should have happened back in 11 and 12 when we went up 24, and it didn't. So why didn't it go up then, and it's going to go up now?
Because
while the sun is diminishing further. Go ahead.
Because the CO2 is at its all-time high now. Where we are right now, it's never been this high before. And you notice that the temperatures globally are going up approximately 2 degrees each year. So that's what's happened there.
You just said temperatures going up 2 degrees C annually?
Yeah, and I'm talking about, for example, summer-wise. Like our temperature, we averaged about 2 degrees above average last summer, and we were averaged above the summer beforehand, and so on. Each summer we're getting down here, we're finding that that average is getting broken each year.
So the temperatures in Australia are warming?
Yes.
The April UAH satellite data is showing that global temperature, which just came out 24 hours ago, is showing global temperature is 0.2 degrees C above the 30-year running mean back to 1979, which shows no global warming for 30 years. Can you explain that with your model?
Well, I'm going by not the whole entire planet's global temperature. I'm going by the Australian summer temperature.
Okay, well, the UAH satellite temperature is the global lower atmosphere.
Yep.
Which shows no global warming for 40 years. And it shows that since 2016, the global average temperature has dropped 0.6 degrees C in the last 2 years. If that's true and the sun is diminishing, don't you think maybe the temperature will continue to diminish year after year?
Well, that's where I'm trying to prove a point there. Is you've got. I know what you're saying, that the sunspot minimum will help drop the temperature of the planet, and I'm not disagreeing with that. And I'm not saying that's not going to happen. But we've got CO2, which is naturally also trying to raise the temperature. In some areas it might raise it, some areas it may not. But what I'm saying is once that the minimum's gone, and the natural cooling that's happening at the moment from the sunspot dropping of the activity, then I believe that the temperatures are going to climb quite quickly.
Okay. Let's get to CO2. You said CO2 is at an all-time high. And I agree with you if we're talking about in the last few hundred years or a few thousand years.
Yep.
But this is the lowest CO2 has been on Earth ever. Are you aware of that?
Okay. Well, by account of NOAA, I disagree. I'm finding that the CO2 has passed that point, that 400 ppm mark, and we're at around 450 at the moment.
And the temperature hasn't risen in 40 years.
Sorry?
So also, the CO2 model, if it is true, and you say you believe in it, if CO2 causes warming, it causes warming in the upper atmosphere, not necessarily on the surface, and the exact opposite is happening. So can you explain why that's going on? Is it all the sun, and then after this minimum in 2 years, everything is going to skyrocket in temperature and we're all going to burn up?
Not burn up, but everything's going to skyrocket in temperature-wise. I believe so, yes.
Okay, that's amazing. So are you aware that as we descend into this solar minimum, that the cosmic rays are also increasing?
Yeah.
And do you know about the work of Svensmark and the cloud experiment at CERN?
No.
Well, basically what in modern science is proving in the last decade is that as cosmic rays increase, they caused increased cloud nucleation between 12 and 20,000 feet in the lower atmosphere, causing increased albedo and cooling. So if that's true, we're about to enter a time period in the next 5 decades where cosmic rays are going to increase to historic levels that modern man has never experienced, which, if the science is correct, will translate into cloud cover that is going to continue to rapidly cool the planet. So do you think that your CO2 will save us from the cosmic ray flux as well?
Well, we're in a period where we've never been before. So, we're basing our findings on models and predictions. So at the end of the day, we're just going to have to wait and see what's going to happen. For another example, the CO2, sorry, I said it was at 450, it's just above 400. And at the last ice age, CO2 reached only 265 before the last ice age that hit. And now we're at four, close to 420.
So you think the low CO2 causes ice ages? Is that what you're telling me? Or?
No, I believe low CO2 doesn't cause ice age. I'm just proving a point that at the moment we're at a point with CO2 where we've never been before. The last ice age of CO2 was at 360, and I don't believe that reading of CO2 triggered an ice age. That's what I'm not saying. I'm just saying that with CO2 we're at a point where we've never ever been before. If you look at the last solar minimum, or the last mini ice age that we had, CO2 wasn't as high as what it is now. We all know the effects of CO2. It traps in the heat in the planet. So what you're saying is true. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not true. But what I'm saying is that the cause of the CO2 will slowly slow down that cooling period than what it should be.
Okay, so how much CO2 is in our atmosphere as a greenhouse gas relative to clouds?
CO2 is roughly around the 420 mark.
420 parts per million. But as a greenhouse gas, what percentage of our atmosphere is CO2 versus water vapor?
Bear with me.
Are you Googling it?
No, I had all this information up earlier. Okay, the carbon monoxide makes up represented about three, I'd say about 370. Methane contributes to about 390, and the nitrous oxide contributes to about 360.
Are you still talking parts per million?
Yes.
Okay, so in the last 400,000 years, CO2 has gone between 280 parts per million and as low as 180 parts per million in each glacial cycle. Each glacial cycle lasts approximately 100,000 years, and the interglacials last just a few thousand years, between 2,000 and 5,000 years, sometimes longer. In fact, the interglacial we're in right now is 8,000 years long and one of the longest, except around 400,000 years ago we had a similar long interglacial. Now, each of these interglacials was warm, and the CO2 only got to 280 and then quickly dropped back down to 180. And then there was a rapid sea level rise, 100,000 years later, CO2 got up to 300 and back down to 180. This has happened every 100,000 years.
Yeah. And I'm not disputing that. What I'm trying to say in the bigger picture is, yes, the planet is cooling down. And, I totally agree with that to a point. Even though, some of our summers, one year our summer gets hotter, the next summer it's quite cooler. But in general, global temperatures each year right up to 2005, the temperatures are going up and up and above 0.4. But what I'm saying is I'm not going to argue that, that CO2 is doing this or CO2. What I'm saying is that CO2 is blanketing the full effect of the solar minimum that's going on. So basically what I'm saying is that our temperatures are dropping, and yes, you had a really cold winter in the Northern Hemisphere. But what I'm saying is because that CO2 is so high and it blankets in that extra, what this solar minimum is doing is not the true reading. You take away that CO2 and you'll probably find that your winter that you just had would be a lot colder than what you actually got.
David, have you ever heard the idea that CO2 follows temperature, and that in the ice record there is ample evidence to show an 800-year lag between temperature rising and then CO2 rising?
Well, I strongly believe that they sort of work together type of thing. There is a bit of a lag, I agree with that.
Okay, so there's ample evidence there's an 800-year lag that CO2 follows temperature, and now in modern times, as CO2 shoots off of the map, the temperature hasn't changed in 40 years. Global temperatures are exactly the same as they were in 1979, and only 0.2 degrees above the average. So there is no temperature change in 4 decades at the moment, and it's cooling. It's cooled 0.6 degrees in the last 2 years. So isn't there ample evidence that CO2 has nothing to do with temperature?
No, what I'm saying is CO2, like if it's cooling by 0.6 degrees, what I'm saying is that if you take away that blanket of CO2, you probably find that the cooling would probably be 0.10.
Yeah, it would be greater. I agree.
That's correct. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. The CO2 that's there at the moment, that keeps that bit of extra warmth into the planet, and why that's there, we're not going to get the true reading of what this solar minimum and is going to do until that CO2 is gone.
Well, that's where I think that we can agree to disagree, because the only reason the planet has been warming since 1880 is because we had gotten to the coldest point of the Dalton minimum. And when you get to the coldest point of a climate cycle, there's only one way to go, and that's back up. And our climate is a cyclic system, and it's not linear. So any of these thoughts that as CO2 rises, the temperature is going to rise linearly has been disproven time and time again over the last 40 years, as every month we get a new tropospheric, atmospheric global data point that shows no warming. So if there's no warming in 4 decades, why do you still believe that CO2 causes warming or is preventing a cooling effect? I still don't get why you're hanging on to the CO2. Do you believe we're in runaway global warming and we're all going to burn up and sea level's going to rise?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying different figures and different numbers than what you're saying.
Are you aware that we're also in a magnetic reversal, and the magnetosphere has been dropping off for decades, and in the last 10 years has accelerated rapidly?
Yeah.
So now what that causes is our actual ionosphere to start to come even closer to the surface. And those cosmic rays coming in and heating the upper atmosphere, like you said, is only going to get worse as we go further into the magnetic pole excursion or flip. A lot of people call it different things. Call it whatever you want. But the North Pole is moving and the South Pole is moving as well. And the magnetosphere is waning. And because you base your predictions on space weather, how do you think that this pole flip, which they say may occur as early as 2035, will affect the weather?
I haven't looked into that one yet.
Okay.
I know it's there, but I haven't looked into that. I'm mainly looking at what's happening now and just beyond what's happening now. So, yeah. And when it comes to that, because we haven't, been around for, a polar flip before, then, what do we really know is going to happen in the long run?
Are you on the cell phone? We're kind of losing your signal a little bit.
Yeah, I'm on the cell phone.
Okay, before I let you go, Dave, you revealed your predictions recently, and how do you do that? Is that just on Facebook?
Facebook, and I've got a webpage as well.
Okay, and you warn that there will be a short autumn season as winter viciously kicks in, correct?
Correct.
We're losing you. Real
Correct.
Quick, if I can't hear you clearly, guys, if you're listening, I'm going to have David Taylor's all his information up on the video when we post it up on our YouTube site. But before I let you go, Dave, tell our listeners where they can see you and plug anything you like.
Where they can see me online, they can see me on Facebook. I own 2 weather pages. I own Brisbane Weather and I own East Coast Weather. And I've also got www.brisbaneweather.xyz.
Excellent. And you run all those or are part of those?
I run them all.
Okay, great. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you. We're going to be following your work. Keep up the good work. Look into these. Look into the cosmic rays. Look into the cloud experiment over at CERN. The work of Svensmark. I highly suggest you check out Suspicious Observer, where you can see some of his Sun series, and magneticreversals.org will help you out there. Yep. David, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being our guest.
No worries.
Awesome.
Cheers. Have a good one.
Cheers. Okay. Well, thank you to David Taylor for coming on our show, guys. I hope you enjoyed that interview. I never met the guy, and he's got a lot to learn, but he's doing good work because he's using the sun to predict the weather. And unfortunately, not a lot of people are using the sun to predict the weather these days. And as we descend into the grand solar minimum and the mainstream weather prediction becomes more and more erratic and incorrect, as our subscribers write to me daily how they're always reporting incorrect temperatures a little above what's actually happening out in the countryside. We can probably expect people, because if the mainstream media is reaching out to David Taylor in the last few days, it's because he's nailing his forecasts and they want to know why. So people want to know what's going on. And unfortunately, he may be part of the problem. Now, he has good short-term forecasting skills, but as you can see, over the last 30 minutes, I was giving him practical information that he just is unaware of. He hasn't done his homework in the science realms, specifically CO2. I mean, I don't know how I could have convinced him any more that the rising CO2 has had no effect on global temperatures. But you guys were listening. The April UAH satellite data is in, and the April data shows that the temperature is only 0.2 degrees C above the 40-year running average. And what does that mean for us? It means that the planet is cooling. It has cooled over a half a degree C since 2016. If it continues to cool at this rate for 2 more years, we will be exceeding the Maunder minimum levels already. If you watch our YouTube channel, we show paleogeographic reconstructions where the temperatures are only, and the maximum regions of cooling only off by 0.7 degrees C. So that means if we continue at the rate we're cooling for just a few more years, we will have already descended into Maunder minimum levels. And then, again, I asked them a simple question about CO2 and what percentage of the atmosphere CO2 is versus all of the greenhouse gases, especially, and what I was most concerned with was water vapor, and he had no answer, which is very upsetting. Because if you claim to be a global warmist or someone that thinks that CO2 has something to do with warming on our planet, you should have spent at least one afternoon researching on what percentage of the atmosphere is actually CO2 and what percentage of the atmosphere is the other greenhouse gases, especially if you think CO2 is going to quickly warm the planet after the solar minimum or is masking the cooling that this solar minimum should be producing. Guys, I don't know what the solar minimum should be producing because for the last 2 months, I have said record low and record snow maybe 10,000 times just for North America. And that includes Europe. We've also had record snows in North Africa, and even in Russia. We've had near record lowest temperatures ever on Earth up in Siberia this year. And lots of you that follow us know this to be true. Another thing we've been seeing is an uptick in volcanic activity as predicted, descending into the grand solar minimum. Current science, because we base all of our predictions on science here and we do our homework. We don't just research the things we want to research, we research everything. And according to the science, as the cosmic rays increase decade after decade moving forward, they're not going to decrease. They go up and down every solar cycle, but each solar minimum moving forward, the cosmic ray flux on the planet will reach new historic levels. So, if we're just talking about the near future and solar cycle 25 and 26, we're talking a period of extreme high cosmic ray flux in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, and potentially a slight reduction moving up into the next solar maximum of cycle 25. That's if we have a cycle 25. It's my prediction at the Oppenheimer Ranch Project that we will have a cycle 25 that begins sometime in 2021, late 2021, and it will be minor at best, barely exceeding 25, maybe 27, 30 sunspots at its peak, and lasting for a very long time, maybe 14 years. So that will bring us all the way out to 30, 36, 7, where the cosmic ray flux at that point will be beyond measure. We don't even know how it will affect humanity. There certainly will be no more astronauts in space, and that might happen in just the next 2 years. There's no way to tell how much cosmic radiation will be up there until we get there. Now, I'm a paleogeologist, a paleogeographer. I'm a stratigrapher and a paleontologist, and I've looked at the rock record throughout most of the Paleozoic, which is 300 to 600 million years ago. And I've also looked at more modern rocks on my own time. And what I can tell you is that at mass extinctions or at smaller climate cycle boundaries, there are often things called K-bentonites. Now, these are large volcanic ash deposits that are global in nature. If not global, they're extreme regional, which means half or quarter of the globe. And these occur at regular intervals on these climate boundaries. Also, what's happening at these boundaries are mass extinctions, where below the K-bentonite or the ash layer are a whole group of fauna that completely disappear, and above it, a new group of fauna. So these mass extinction layers are corresponding to massive volcanic events at massive climate boundaries. Now, in our geologic toolbox, we never had an explanation for this. We usually just used sea level. because on that boundary you can tell there's been a sea level rise event or a sea level fall event, because the environments above and below are completely different. And what does that mean for you and I as an earthling? It means that we are gaining more and more knowledge as we move forward into what these things mean. And in just the last decade, we now know that at solar minimums, when the climate changes, earthquakes go off, and they make the climate get colder faster. And this is due to the albedo effect. Now, those of you listening that have never heard of the albedo effect, it's simply a measure of the reflectivity of the Earth. The more snow and white cloud cover in our atmosphere and on our surface, the more solar rays get bounced back into space and are prevented from heating our planet. In layman's terms, the higher the albedo, the cooler the Earth. So ultimately, what does that mean? It means that in solar minimums, all scientific evidence is pointing towards rapid cooling, because we now know that as we descend into this minimum, more volcanoes will erupt, creating more gas and ash clouds, nucleating more clouds, reflecting more sun into space. We've just seen in the last 5 years all-time record snows in North America getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And this year, just like I said, I was a broken record saying broken record. And it's only going to continue. It's going to continue year after year. And at some point, we're talking about food spikes, crop losses, and famine. And how that unfolds is anybody's guess. But let's stay on the modern science and what happens on these boundaries, the one that we're in. We happen to be on a unique one that also corresponds to the beginning of a major glacial period, or the end of the interstadial, which means that the temperature on planet should, based on historic documents, all of the ice cores that we've collected over the last 4 decades, we should be going into a very long extended glacial period. Now, thanks to the global warming alarmists and the global warming dogma that has been shoved down your throats, no one is preparing for what is to come. If you quickly look at sunspots, and someone like David Taylor, who doesn't know all of the science, bless his heart, he's trying, and he's using sunspots to just predict the near future, and he's doing it better than the people that claim that they know. Heads up. That should really be a wake-up call for those of you listening out there. There's a lot for all of us to learn, but I'm putting the pieces together for you tonight because what I've been told by many is that I need to do some more background for you. So tonight we're just going to talk about the science of the grand solar minimum. And soon we're going to be, we'll have a book coming out for the layman on all cosmic cycles and how they relate to humanity and the climate. Because the empire model, empires rise and fall based on the climate. And that changes in a number of scales. It changes in 100 to multi-centennial scale. It also changes in a millennial scale. And there's additive effects. There are layers and layers of cycles that force climate. The larger scale cycles come way outside of the Earth. They come from our sun, from the solar system, and from the cosmos. And these have been affecting the ice ages and the changing climate on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. And as a geologist, I've been out there looking at the rocks for hundreds of millions of years worth of the entire geologic record. I've been in quarries all over the world, and I've seen the same patterns of climate change happening back in the Precambrian that happened during the dinosaurs in the Mesozoic that are happening today. There's no difference. The extreme fluctuation in climate has been happening on a 26,000-year regular scale again and again and again in different degrees for all of geologic history, as far as I can tell. I have never gone into a place, a basin, and seen anything but a hierarchy of climate cycles right before my eyes on a 26,000-year scale. These cycles are packaged into 100,000-year packages where you can see 3-4 cycles every 100,000 years getting greater and greater. And this is for the entire geologic record. So whatever is controlling that is consistent, is external, and is unstoppable. And if you look at the scientific information, which is getting clearer and clearer day after day, we're getting a very clear fingerprint, of a photograph of what to expect. What are we to expect? Well, if we are at the end of the interstadial and we are dropping off into the next glacial period, this grand solar minimum should be very unique. It could last for decades and decades, and we may never recover to any levels like the warm temperatures you have ever seen. In our lifetimes, it's going to continue to get colder. There will be no warming at all, warmer than now, ever in your lifetime. So that's the inconvenient truth, and that's why we're here. Now, what does that mean? It means that even if in your lifetime in the next 3 or 4 decades, global temperatures drop 0.6 degrees C and we're back down in Maunder minimum levels, guys, you're still going to have a summer. That's a half a degree C cooler every day. So instead of 89, it'll be 88.5. You won't notice the difference in seasons. What will happen is major climatic shifts, violent changes, extreme cold winters, extremely hot summers, extreme weather happening in summers. You're going to have winters that extend into summer, winters that begin in summer, summers that happen in the middle of winter. It will be crazy, but the overall pattern is global temperatures will drop. So that's going to drive crop failures. The temperature is not going to get any one. If you're in a cold area, you'll need more wood. If you're in an area on the fence, you may need to get a wood-burning stove and wood. But there are ways to prepare for the change in the climate. That is the least of your worries. What you need to prepare for is the radical shift coming in the near future of the empire model. Because I don't know if you guys know, the entire globe is in trillions of dollars worth of debt and has gotten itself into it has pushed itself into the corner in the biggest Ponzi scheme ever. And the jig is up. So the SHTF event is right around the corner. I give it 2 years max. And what you're going to see this fall is the collapse of the modern banking system. Markets are going to start to collapse sometime in September. And then over the next year, they're going to figure out how to shift fiat money into cryptocurrency, because fiat money is just as fake as cryptocurrency is real. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? This is the illusion of control. So I would say, get a couple dollars over there in the Bitcoin market, a quarter of your savings at least, because if you have all your savings in the fiat money market, when that collapses, it's all gone. Now, what else should you expect in the next 2 years? Well, the next 2 years, you should be preparing for a collapse of your local economy. It's going to be regional at first, and we're going to watch it happen around the globe. So you're going to get a warning. Just like we're going to get a warning when the next major VEI7 supervolcano erupts, we are going to have a window to be warned. They don't just blow. There's ample evidence to suggest that we will have many days of advance warning before a large volcano explodes. And that's just the facts based on the geologic record and the historical documentation. Smaller eruptions sometimes catch us off guard. But just take the VEI 4 eruption of St. Helens 4-5 back in the 80s. We had weeks of warning, and still idiots stood up there. So even if we warn you that you're all going to die, there will still be idiots taking selfies of their death. And it happens time immemorial. Every 1,000 years, the empire fails and the idiots are culled. Now, unfortunately, a lot of you that are misinformed or ill-informed are going to suffer. Those that aren't prepared are going to suffer needlessly, which is why I started the YouTube channel and I started this radio program. Because the inconvenient truth is knowing the truth. The most dangerous weapon against the corrupt system that you're living in is an informed public, which is why censorship is happening at record levels. They don't want you to hear the truth. They want to confuse the narrative. They want to separate you. They want you fighting about nothing. Because as the economy crumbles, you'll be too busy bickering about migrants or what have you to realize that you don't have the proper things to survive in the near future. And the inconvenient truth is that the empires every 1,000 years have fallen. That's why I share the GISP-2 graph every night in every episode of our YouTube channel. Because the graph that we use shows what happens when the sun shuts down every 1,000 years. The Minoan warm period, back in 1350 BC, 3,000 years ago, 3,300 years ago, quickly ended during a grand solar minimum like we're going into. The Yellow River froze. There was frost in July in China, and the Shang dynasty collapsed. The reason we don't use carbon-14 is because of the carbon-14 Hallstatt disaster. The collapse of the Egyptian kingdom after Pharaoh Takalov. Tree lines move lower and European temperatures drop 2 degrees C. That was just a grand solar minimum back in the Minoan that destroyed all of the empires. You weren't taught about that in school because for some reason they've been hiding this information in plain sight. 1,000 years later, Romans controlling the planet, the Roman warm, back in Jesus and all that. Boom! The great migration of Goth and Huns and Vandals begins. The Roman famine, the losses to the Goths, the empire breaks into numerous parts, terrible crime. The Han dynasty collapsed. China was divided into 3 kingdoms, thanks to the sun. Let's talk about 1000 AD, another warm period, about to be destroyed by another grand solar minimum. The Vikings settled Newfoundland, and then just a few hundred years later, that was it. Last report from Greenland. The glaciers grew and destroyed villages. Witches were burned in the 1600s. 50,000 witches were burned. Guys, we'll be right back. Stay with us. This is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and this is The Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the Grand Solar Minimum. We'll be right back.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. with your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. It's going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax. Let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio, at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Boom! Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for staying with us. This is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you the second half of the Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the Grand Solar Minimum. We just had David Taylor on, and my mind was blown about his lack of knowledge. Now, I'm happy for the guy that he's predicting the weather and using sunspots, but I just at break went in there to talk to Leah to see if she was listening because I needed someone to talk to about that interview. And so, sure enough, my buddy Scott McDonough, who's our producer in Tucson, Arizona, who's making all of these radio programs happen, thank goodness, is listening every night because without him we couldn't have this radio show. He's decided to join us on air so that I have someone to talk to. Scott, are you there? And welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. In fact, you sound
awesome.
like one of the best guests I've had. Now, clearly you were listening to the first hour, right, Scott?
Yeah, that was, I caught that first hour, yeah.
Now, let me guys tell you, listening out there, I've known Scott just for a few months when he reached out to me to produce the show because we really needed help because where we are here is far out, to say the least, so our connection isn't that good. So he volunteered to use his excellent connection in Arizona to host the show. He even came out and visited and stayed a few days this week, and it was awesome. I think he really got a feel for the place. And I really need to ask you, Scott, because he has a good background knowledge of Grand Solar Minimum and the science. Now, Scott is a layman, and he just started listening, so he's just learning. But I think that Scott knows more about science than David Taylor does. Scott, can you confirm or deny?
Well, I must admit that a lot of what I've learned, I've picked up from both you and from Ice Age 2030, from Ice Age Farmer, from Suspicious Observer. I kind of gleaned a lot and kind of amalgamated all of your different thought patterns into what I believe is a real explanation for what I see happening. When you don't have an explanation for what you see in front of you, you tend to fill it with the scariest of stories, especially when those scary stories are presented to you. But when you don't see things actually transpiring in front of you like you're told they are, then you kind of start questioning it. If you're willing to be open and you're not afraid to face reality, you will step back and say, what is really going on here? So that's the key to it, is just a willingness to not be afraid to ask questions. So getting back to what you said, most of what I know now is what I picked up from you guys, and it's been very helpful for me to put my world into some perspective that makes sense.
Well, that's good news. And for the most part, those of us that are covering these earth changes related to the sun and space, we tend to reference our sources. So if you want to go see what we're talking about, you can go into the literature and see the scientific papers or sources we are discussing. And I thought, when I heard his point of view on CO2 and how it's going to warm the planet and all that nonsense, I said, okay, I took a deep breath, and then I said, let me lay him out the facts, because he's missing the facts. So I gave him the geologic facts and the history and the temperature data and the fact that the Earth hasn't warmed for 4 decades. And I don't think he heard any of that. Did you see how I laid it out? Did you listen, Scott? What were your thoughts when I was doing that?
Yeah, it was. So that is his career, is to intelligently speak about a particular subject. And I think if there's, like it is with a lot of people, if you present data that changes their worldview that they're invested in, it makes it very difficult, and probably becomes even more difficult when you're kind of cornered on the airwaves. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah,
maybe if you had him,
go ahead.
Maybe if you had him just one-on-one and laid some arts and charts in front of him, he probably would have been a little more pliable to, listening to this new information that's becoming available to everybody. But it's hard when you're invested, especially if he's becoming, well known for a particular point of view. It's hard to let go of that and listen to another idea.
He didn't even know the percentage of greenhouse gas CO2 was in our atmosphere. I think that lots of people in high school may know that. Anyway, let's get to more important things, Scott. For the next hour, I don't want to pick apart the fact that people may or may not be able to do their own research. I want to ask you some questions that I think would help me glean more information on how I can make a better show. So, when you first found us, the Grand Solar Minimum channels, did you start to do more homework, or were you just listening to the shows?
I was listening to the shows. I wouldn't say that I had said that I picked up the documents that you refer to and then go and start reading those. We kind of talked about this when I was talking with you last week. Is there's only so much time that you can put together in a day to go out and research things, and I have a lot of things that go on in my day where I don't get as much time to research as someone who is scientific, or like you do, where you try to put together a show. So I depend on my discernment in as I observe different websites, different YouTube channels. I try to look for, I try to use discernment, and I try to reference people that are telling me something that rings true, something that is evident in what I see out in the world. For example, the perfect example is the way I found you in the first place was, and I've been following you for maybe a month now. I think it's been maybe 6 weeks. I have to go back and look, but my foray into the whole new set of sciences here, mine came from, and don't cringe, be sitting down, the whole chemtrail versus contrail controversy. So, I'm about 57 now, and I've been around for a long time. And I can remember, being a child and looking up in the sky, and the sky was this very deep, intense blue color, and the sun was yellow. And certainly in the last 10 years, the sun is just this white haze, and the skies become this white haze. And that I've heard people speak about just on a day-to-day basis, but then there became that whole contrail, chemtrail thing. And certainly I look up in the sky and I see these lines following the planes, and sometimes they were always a short collection of clouds, but they've come to cross the entire sky and they'll sit up there for hours. Well, I didn't know what to think. And all I knew is something was happening, and that's the thing, look up, look around you, observe what you see, and then try to find intelligent people that can help you understand. So definitely my searches led to a few different theories and led me to your presentations that you've done on the condensation trails in the sky and how they're affected and how they're affected by cosmic rays, not by evil plots to poison the planet. So yes, my research is not as extensive as yours. I couldn't read a peer-reviewed document and probably understand it enough to pull out of it, oh, there's an important factor, here's an important fact. I'm not that scientific, but what I am is I'm inquisitive enough to know when I see something that doesn't make sense, I then look for answers, and I do know how to find people like yourself. So I think that's where a lot of people are at is, they're working all day. They come home, they got dishes, they've got dinner, they've got kids, they've got laundry. And if they have time to just sit and listen to one intelligent show, that's probably what a lot of listeners out there are like. They're trying to just grab onto one piece of intelligence that they can trust and hope that they're getting headed in the right direction instead of all the false narratives that they know that they've been fed and they're trying to turn away from.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I was inspired to do the show. It was the fact that as an activist, this is what I've been doing for a decade. I've been informing the public, starting with the GMO controversy, the revolving door of Monsanto, and how big ag was now, and big pharma was now married in the back room of government. And it evolved. It evolved to where I am today because now there's a problem for all of humanity, which is the weather. And the powers that be don't care about you because if they had in the past, these empires wouldn't have collapsed. They're designed to fail. And the powers that be know when they fail and they start preparing to save themselves. This might be a unique one where they might actually, because we have so many people on the planet, be planning to have a tighter grip on humanity than ever before by herding us like cattle into places where we will have to get our food, which is why I think this is a wake-up call for everyone to be self-sufficient and far away from major population centers. Now, it's interesting that you described how you found us recently and you trust us. And, I never meant to be conspiracy theory debunking channel, but it seems like we had to turn into a conspiracy theory factual evidence readjustment channel, because a lot of people are led astray. A lot of people that are listening to our information believe other false narratives that are not very helpful in the times we're going to. You were just out at the ranch, Scott, and I'm sure you had an impression on how much it would take to properly prepare to be off-grid and self-sufficient. You just had a wake-up call because you were just here. Can you share with our listeners what you gleaned in the short period you were here about what is involved?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the systems that you're putting in place right now, the solar systems, whether they're passive or active, the water treatment ponds that you're setting up. Now yours are quite large due to the size of the property and some of the dwellings that you're going to have down in the lower area of the property. But for an individual, it would kind of depend on whether you're in the country or you're going to be homebound through all these changes. I've always heard it said that the further you are away from a city, the better you are. And I guess the thing to do in that case would be, so many people, they have a job, they have a life, and that's not going to change until something changes it for them. And so that's kind of the way that I'm mentally prepared is I'm living with both hats on. I realize that there may come a day, and I say that, it could happen, most likely will happen, but you never know. And so, I live in today in as much as there's a normalcy that is in place and is running. But I'm also in my thoughts and in the actions that I go through the day, I reserve a certain amount of time where I think through and I am actively preparing. And that means phone calls, that means emails to people about, for instance, coming out and visiting you. That was a part of preparing a place to go to where you can go through and you can learn how to quickly grow your own food, and you can help out, and then you can break off on your own and do that type of thing. So I think it's important for people who say, well, I can't prepare, I have a job, or I have maybe a spouse who doesn't want to hear about these sorts of things. I'm here to tell people that from what I can tell, it is happening. From what I've seen going on over the last couple of years, it is happening. We'll see what happens in the winter, especially down in the southern hemisphere as their winters get started early here. So what I would like to say is that the important thing for your quote unquote normal person is don't be afraid to start thinking. Just take a little pie out of your day to start thinking, okay, if it's truly going to become not necessarily freezing cold where I'm at, but if the weather is going to make it nearly impossible as the springs encroach on summer and as the winter encroaches on the fall, the growing periods are not going to be long enough to let the plants mature. And we've already seen lots of crop losses. So what can you do? You can start growing right now and have some mistakes. I planted some things. I got started last year, and I planted some things, and I killed everything except for one pepper plant. Everything died.
Good for you.
But this year, I have two beautiful tomato plants. I have a apple tree that has apples already growing on it, the size of small plums. I have a bean plant that's actually got beans growing on it that you pluck off and eat. So
awesome. Is
So
this the first
you have
year?
to do that.
Is this the first year you did the apples? You got apples?
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, they're growing for the first time this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. What they told us at the nursery when we bought the tree is they say, take this home. It's going to start flowering. As soon as the fruit starts forming, cut all the fruit off and let the tree focus on its roots. So so this is the tree without getting its fruit cut off. So I think the roots are doing really well. We have a peach, an apple, and a fig tree, and they're all showing fruit. So, but that's
you don't have to cut all the fruit off, Scott. You can just take 5 or 10 off and give some to the roots and keep some fruit. So that's also a possibility your first year.
Okay. Well, it was a shame too, because I saw it all sitting on the ground. She take the fruit off the tree the first year. It's like, so I cut it all off, and it's like, oh man, they're all just laying there. It was, wait a whole other year to get some. But anyway,
you did cut it off the first year.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're good. You don't have to cut any more off.
No. I'm not cutting any more off now. They're showing up now. So, but that's what I would urge people to do is to, I'm just a common average person. You got the, we got the jobs, we got the children, we got all the normal things that this rat race has us going in. And as we've taken the red pill and we're beginning to step out of that, sometimes, you can do it faster. If you've lost your job, you can go running headlong into a lifestyle that's more sustainable. If you're not in that position quite yet, and you just want to kind of milk the system till the bottom falls out on it, just be sure you have all the pieces in place. Everyone's heard it before. You need to have a place to land, which would include you can find inexpensive land and maybe just put that in your back pocket. Have a place to go one day where you could put a garden in. If you're living in the city and you can't do that, you can find property out of the city for $12,000 for a small piece of land, and you can just do land contract payments that are very inexpensive, and just have that set up for your get-go. Then you can plan to improve that property. You can go and you can try planting some things, and there's ways to plant things that are more. Yeah, and then you can, go camp on it and start breaking it in and getting it ready, and then maybe depending on where it's at, you could put a trailer there. You could get a pump put in, a well put in place, and then maybe next year put a septic in. So you can start improving the land and get it as far along as you can, and then you can just leave it off grid. You don't need to run a huge air conditioner, especially if you choose the right place. So just
are you listening, listeners? Scott, these are great ideas. They tie into our final episode with Lee Wheelbarger. Did you listen to the one when he was talking about the bug out bus?
Yes, the Bob.
That thing is amazing. So these are all steps that all of you people out there that are stuck in the empire model, you're a slave and you have no time, you can slowly pick it apart. Now, out here we have a place just 10 miles out of town called the Wild West, where you can buy on eBay a 1 acre lot. It's $500 down, $250 a month. There are places all over in rural areas where land like this is selling like that. But make sure you check on it that it's real, because a lot of people get scammed on these. So just like Scott said, you can go camp there before you buy or get a realtor to get you into these properties. They're inexpensive, and you can cut down all your other activities to start prepping for a future that is coming quickly. Now, and I love what Scott said there. You get the small piece of property, and then you bring the family out there on your 2-week respite from your slave model during your vacation, and you can camp there, plant a fruit tree every year there, and at any time the SHTF event occurs, boom, you can wait it out and escape there if you have the correct plan. I love the idea. Do you want to continue with your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I had done is I was working mostly towards, I think what's important is the people have to decide that what you're speaking of, the future that you're speaking of, it is from a food perspective, not necessarily from a weather perspective, unless you get hit by the additional lightning that's going to be there. But from just the perspective of temperature, it's not going to be too harsh. But what it will do is it will devastate the food systems that we have in place.
Well, let me lay out my scenario, and then you tell me what you're going to do. Okay, Scott?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So this is the way I see it unfolding. This fall, we're going to see all these little tiny crop failures globally are going to be only noticeable in your local area for certain things. And these certain grains and commodities from North America are going to affect certain processed foods. So this fall, we're going to see certain things spiking, and humanity will just be able to eliminate buying those dumb things that are now $9 a pound or whatever, and everyone will just get along. But then it's going to accelerate, because what we have had in the last few years is minor crop failures and some of the grain supplies being downgraded. So we have this glut of animal food, and we've been reducing the amount of supplies of human grain foods, commodities. So at some point, if we have a huge failure, which is predicted for 2019, oats, wheat, very bad year. So go long and go big then. If you're a gambler on commodities, 2019 oats is a great bet. Oats are the biggest one to collapse because they have the highest payoff, and they're the most sensitive and most important. And that's a good way to go for 2019. So by 2019, we're going to see the major crop failures, and then it's going to accelerate. So a year and a half from now, food is going to skyrocket. Now, unfortunately, from now till then, we're going to have those collapses of fiat money exchanges. The stock market is going to pummel, it's going to plummet, because if you follow Armstrong economics, guys, this is all based on the sun. They nail it, and it's coming. In 2019 is the grain spike, and that's going to lead to rapid inflation. If we couple this with markets collapsing and your entire retirement savings shrinking from $1 million to 100,000 or 400,000 to 40,000 in a month, what are you going to do? So that's how I see it unfolding in the next 2 years. And unfortunately, in that same time period, we're going to be at the deep minimum with cosmic rays at historic highs. They've never been this high on Earth ever in this time period, meaning a year from now, we'll be in that zone at every city in America. And that, I fear, is going to create a major eruption which will rapidly cool the planet, darken the skies for a few days or months in certain areas, and freak everyone in that area out. So as it's hard to get commodities in 2 years, prices are expensive. In some area, people are going to start to go crazy, and the unrest begins locally at that time. What are you doing, Scott, if that's how it unfolds?
Now, so you said eruptions, and you're referring to volcanoes, right?
Yes, a big volcano in 2019, making it dark and freaking out, let's say, all of Africa, where they just go crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and so there's so much thought of everybody through all their different cultures. Everybody has an end of the world theme, a prediction, and certainly every one of them includes, the sky darkening and lightning and. Yeah, so it's every religion around the world is going to find a home this disaster, and they're going to fear the worst. And just like, people think that all of the contrails are chemtrails, they're going to think that this volcano is some sort of wrath, and it's not. It's called it's the bottom of a cycle. So it's and it happens. So how am I going to handle it? Well, that is, going back to what I said is I'm preparing the landing spot. I'm prepared to grow food. Learning how to. I'm going through that process right now. Like you said, we've got about. It's hard to say when a volcano is going to go off. I mean, something like that will definitely punctuate the situation if you have, some, maybe not Yellowstone, but, something in the Pacific that's large enough to, hamper the sky, the sun coming through. But that could be that just adds another year or two to covering up the plants so that the sun can't get to them. So, that's a part of what I've been thinking about too, is when I think about these plants, excuse me, I'm considering the fact that they're going to be short on light. So you might have to supplement them in some way. So with that situation that you spoke about, where there'll be that kind of turmoil, you definitely, each individual out there has to ask themselves, do you think that there's better than a 50-50 chance that this could happen? And what percentage chance would you say, Diamond, that it is going to get bad enough that people would feel uncomfortable staying in the city? I mean, if you just, because of the turmoil and because of maybe the government coming in and trying to tell you, this is your food card. What is your personal take based on what you know is going to happen? What do you think most people? My question is, do you think most people would get to a point where they would say, "I wish I had a plan"?
It's hard to predict that. It is all based on how it unfolds. Now, I see it unfolding slowly, like I just suggested. And here's the advantage for those that are listening have. If you're slowly preparing as we go, every time I go to the store, I buy a carton of cigarettes, 50 pounds of that, 20 of this, if I have extra money. So I can put it here, or extra bullets. Let's get a little of that. Oh, I have a 20, let's do that. And so every day I'm thinking of a little extra thing and just forgetting about it, because it goes things I can stock that are dry, that are good forever. So that's like just part of my safety net that's building, right? But because of social media and the way that the world is connected, we are going to witness it happening. So we're going to have, just like we're going to have ample warning of a large eruption, a few weeks, maybe just a few days at the minimum, but we're going to have a warning it's going to go. So hopefully 80% of the population won't think Jesus is returning, and they'll understand it's a volcano.
Right.
So we're actually going to be able to see it happen. So if a big thing happens, everyone's going to be at Walmart. Hundreds of people go crazy. So if it happens that way, it's better to be prepared now. Because you can then go to Walmart and be in the masses, because also at home you've already have a stockpile of shit. You're just, blending in.
Yeah, and that's what. And so what I was trying to get at with that question was, I'm hoping
anyway,
that
let me answer it. I apologize. Let me answer it. There is a 100% chance that the world you live in will be completely different in 2035. 100% chance. There is now a 50 to 80% chance that shift will occur in the next 3 years.
Okay, so that's what I was looking for. So what we're talking about is
next year. Ask me again, and we can see how high that is.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to provide to people. If there's a 50-50 chance that your world could be turned upside down, such that whether it's the volcano, whether it's the economy, whether it's you losing your job. There's a war gets started to try, as it always does, to try and hide what's going on. You know, if those things are likely to happen, when one just leads to the other, you know, any of these events happen, everything is so close to the edge as it is. The economy is close to the edge. The political strife is to the edge. The nature is pushed to the edge already. So with everything at the edge, when one breaks, they all will most likely come down behind it. So with you saying that there's a 50% chance of everyone's world being different, you have to ask yourself, you have to not be afraid to step back and say, you know, I'm not going to get a new car for another year or two, even though I love new cars and I get a new one every year. If anybody has that luxury anymore, I'm not sure, but I don't. But, you know, people, you make choices with your money. And so you have to say to yourself,
from the knowledge we have, you should, if you're getting a new car, it should be 1986 or earlier.
Exactly. If you get a new one, get an old one so that the cosmic rays don't knock your electrical system out. That is true.
Yeah, protect from EMP.
And plus, they're cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So seriously, you know, take a little nibble off that red pill, and say, my gosh, I think he knows what he's talking about. I haven't looked into it. He seems sure of it. You know, heck, I'm not going to say go out and research. I'm going to say start planning, because there's not even time to go out there and say, well, I'm not sure if I believe it. Let me look into a little more. There's about 2 years, and you're going to need that whole 2 years to screw up on gardening, to start adjusting finances so that you can step off to a location. You got to find a location. So there's time right now where you can get your future in order for a controlled slide from where you're at into the future that it's not a future you want. Maybe it is a future you want. You know, maybe not having to worry about a job and growing your own food and not having maybe there'll be a lot of happy people after this happens. I don't know.
No rent. Imagine that. No taxes and no rent. Let's all vote. I'll get 100 random people in a room and say, what if we turned off all the electric forever, and in return, you never have to answer to the man, but you don't get any electric ever. You don't have to go to work. You don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to pay any bills, but you have to start living to live today. How many people would raise their hands? I think it'd be like 55 out of 100.
Yeah, if you faced your fears and pushed them aside, I think you would prefer the life that's simpler and more honest. Most definitely.
All of the great authors that write about separating themselves from society, so to speak, getting back to nature, all come to the same conclusions. People that are living in inner cities are escaping to the South American jungles to have ayahuasca ceremonies done so that they can escape the empire model. The slavery and brainwashing is complete. Humanity's been lied to from the beginning. Every single one of you has been raised and programmed by the family before you the way that they were programmed. It all comes from a system of programming time immemorial that drives this empire model, where the powers that be extract your money to keep control over the masses. There's a better way to live. It's happened before. There are communities all over that people are living in harmony together. Now, granted, people have disagreements. They fight. They cry. They punch each other in the face. But in a just society, and they apologize and they hug and they get over it. Right. They go fishing because stuff happens. I mean, that's called life. If you're living in the moment, we all make mistakes. We're human. Nuclear wars are not mistakes. They're manufactured. You don't accidentally kill millions of people with bombs. Let's get real. The entire military industrial complex is a game of risk created to create wealth for the powers that control the world, the multinational corporations. And unfortunately, that is the truth. We need a reset because the noose is only going to get tighter. And I think they're going to try to hold on through this event. What are your thoughts on that, Scott, about FEMA camps, Agenda 21, the control mechanism? Do you have any thoughts on, because I see it, the people in major cities, if something big happens, are screwed. It's going to be like Escape from New York, where those that stay to play have to get a number, and you get a food ticket. And all the rest are arrested or like processed, or it's just better to be rural because they're not coming for you.
Yeah. Right now, every federal, every state, every local governance, they are already strapped to the limit. They can't even keep the potholes out of the road. They can't pay for the retirement for all the people that have retired. They have no money now. If the stock market were to crash, which it will do when they choose, right now it's artificially pumped up and by continuous money printing, all the governments of the world will now freely admit that they own more ETFs than the people in the countries. And that's the reason the prices of every stock has gone up 45 degrees, well, not 45, but it's gone up on a straight arrow. Technically, that's impossible for...
Scott, I just told you I have a stock that is up 5,000% for the year. 5,000%.
The emergency backup stock. Yeah.
It's the manipulation stock. All the brokers are dumping into this penny stock, and it's all manipulated.
Yeah, and so they are going to choose when they decide to pull the plug on that. But what could happen in the meantime that either they're unaware of or, well, I would just say that they're unaware of it because I don't think they're listening. I think they're unaware of the fact that all these computer systems that they're going to rely on for all this control, in a couple of years, when the magnetosphere is completely decayed and cosmic rays just come flying in and the sun begins to let off a few more belches after its quiet period here, the electronics that are used for cell towers, for internet, for all the computers, that there's a fair chance, and once again, I'll let you put a statistic on it, but there's a fair chance that the control mechanism without the automation is undoable. You can't manage millions of people if you don't have some type of automation. You can't do it by an index card and someone sitting at a desk. Not at all. So what I'm depending on the solar flares, the cosmic rays to finish the government off before they can go and try and wrangle in the citizenry. What is your thought on that?
Well, and I think that is the beauty of the cosmos. And I think that this all goes back to cosmic catastrophe. It's written by the ancients we'll talk about the bamboo books and the cycles in the Far East, the Yuga cycles in India, the Great Year coming out of ancient Europe. They're all the same thing. They're all talking about the precession of the equinoxes and how we go into a golden age, a silver age, and a dark age. We're in the dark age, and that gets ended by the universe somehow. And I think we're witnessing it, and it's really funny how it happens. The weather gets bad, the elites don't lose control, and we all go back to nature. And it resets because the universe does it automatically. And now that we're in this dark age, we've got this humanity coming up with all these conspiracy theories, the aliens and lizards and chemtrails, and like there's all this money to throw out into the air to cross your fingers and hope to do something. It's totally insane, and I can't wait. And so let's get to the answer. So it's based on all my experience when we go into cycle 25, as it starts to emerge in 2022, 23, and 24, at some time in that 2023, 24 period, the sun is going to shoot off an X flare. And at that point, the magnetosphere, we don't know where it will be. That's 5 years from now. And so that's a good time frame when the grid starts to get irreparably damaged, because there's not enough time to put it up, and it's just each, and then the X flares, there's always 1.5 every year. There never hasn't been. So those are just going to get worse and worse and fry more and more and more. But there's recent evidence to suggest, and a paper just came out that I shared, I don't know, a few months ago. I'd have to look it up again. But it suggests that as we go into deep minimums, which is just in the next few years, that, you know, the mainstream is suggesting there'll be no more auroras or energy and there'll be no major flaring. But that is not what this paper suggests. It suggests that there's more giant flares in smaller numbers, which is very bad news for the next few years. Because cosmic rays are going to be at a historic high in 1 year for the whole planet, higher than they've ever been, which means the grid will have never been at this vulnerable. And if at that minimum we get a big X flare, as predicted, in the next 2 years, that could start the panic. Because if it fried a major portion of the grid, and it's cold out, let's say, it's the winter of 2019 or the winter of 2020, and the grid's not coming back up in Canada all winter, there are going to be 10,000 people frozen to death in the first 3 days, 50,000 people frozen to death trying to walk somewhere in the first 7 days, and the numbers are going to be staggering.
Every thermostat out there is electronic.
Yeah. It'll be bad.
Yep.
Because people will wait. We are programmed to wait. It'll come back on, and then it'll be too late. It'll be freezing cold. You'll burn through all your wood. It'll continue to snow. You'll get the bad news. It's not coming back on, and there'll be no snow plows, no point-of-sale deliveries. There'll be global panic. It is not going to go down good. You can just research what happened here in Arizona when the blizzard happened back in the 50s, or I think it might even be in the 60s. It snowed for so long they couldn't get there. It was bad. People almost starved to death in just 5 days.
Yep. So that's my, that's what I'm trying to convey out there to people is, you don't have to change your world today. You don't have to flip your entire life, in the next week or two, but know with better than 50% chance assuredness that it is going to happen. And that's pretty good reason. I mean, you have insurance for your cars, costs hundreds of dollars a month. You got insurance on your health. You have insurance on your house. Just look at this as one more little piece of insurance, and you take that step towards admitting to yourself and coming to terms with this is a very likely going to be the future, and that it's not going to be a bad thing. It can actually be a positive thing for your experience in this existence. And so don't be afraid of it. Open yourself up to it, and ask it where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do, and you'll find that one step leads to another, and by taking that step, and as it works in all facets of life, by taking that first step and then taking another, you get someplace. But you don't get someplace saying, well, when it happens, I'll do it, because it will not happen. And it comes down to more than the fact that whether Walmart has enough stuff for you when it happens. When it does happen, you still won't want to change unless you start changing now, piece by piece, little by little, because people do not change 180 degrees in thought. You need to start opening your mind and taking one step after the other. So that's what I'm currently doing. I'm about a year and a half into my red pill experience, and I've done the gardening. I'm starting to look around to see where do I land when my city goes berserk, as it will likely do, and without getting too conspiracy theory, but that there will be a control mechanism in each city that will not have much mercy on people that are trying to do something different than what they have planned in mind. And their plan isn't to get you out into the country and get you growing your own food. So,
absolutely. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about those that are listening now. They nibbled some red pill and they're like, well, okay, I guess I can do something. I wonder what I should do. I'll go to Walmart and buy some seeds. Guys, WWOOFUSA.org. wolfusa.org, WWOOFUSA.org, WWOOFUSA.org. This is the Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. It is a worldwide program, but USA Wolf, or wolfusa.org, is part of this worldwide effort to link you people, visitors, with organic farmers, to promote educational exchange, build a global community of conscious and ecological farming practices, and you can do it for free. You just go to the website, you join, pick any farm in the world you want to go to for free. You can stay at these farms. Some of them have apartments, some of them feed you, and you can learn how they're doing their farming, organic farming. If you don't know about farming, this is a way to do it for free. If you have vacation this summer, join Wolf. You and your family can go to a farm, stay for free in exchange for your help. You go weed and you learn about how to plant or harvest food or grow chickens or whatever. Wolf USA. There are so many farms to choose from. You can go to an alpaca farm. You can go to a grain farm. You can farm tomatoes. You can farm chickens, pigs. The choice is yours. There's fish farms. There's all kind of farms. Oppenheimer Ranch Project, Three Canyons Permaculture Farm is on Wolf USA. You can come here this summer and volunteer your time and eat all the food you want for free. Lee and I just got our first geothermal greenhouse set up here just a month ago, and today I went out and harvested our first meal from it, and we have enough food for 3 more people to eat continuously now forever because it's established. It's going to eventually, in about 3 weeks, have so much food in there, I need to start selling it. And thankfully, the farmer's market starts in 2 weeks. So everything's working out correctly here, and we're about to install enough greenhouse space to grow 50 times more food, which is going to be food for almost everyone in this town. And these are small steps we're taking, which will equal abundance in the future, more food in abundance that we could ever need. We could feed people for hundreds of miles in this area. The irony is that almost every other person living here has a greenhouse and grows food. Now, guys, let the past be your guide. Technology is inedible. It is extremely sensitive. It has not been designed with our cosmogenic future at hand, which is bleak for technology. There's no way to shield from cosmic rays, or else we'd be doing it for astronauts. There is no way to do it. We haven't figured it out. We may discover it in the future, but technology is doomed.
That they were? Had you heard the report? Maybe I dreamt this or something. But is there some type of something going on with the International Space Station where they're going to have to bring people back, or they're not going to send up any more people, or what is that going on with?
So the maximum exposure in space now is been downgraded to 200 days. If you're in space for more than 200 continuous days, you're essentially dying. So the amount of radiation dose is so high that you know how we have all these records of people spending over a year in space?
Mm-hmm.
If you did that now, you'd be dead. And that window is going to quickly close in the next few years. I think that by 2022, the space window might be more like 50 days or 100 days or less.
Okay. Yeah.
So what that means for commercial pilots in a decade, they're going to be getting doses every day up there. So commercial pilots could start getting sick in the near future. And eventually, in a few decades...
That's another thing I'd heard about, too, is that the people in the airline industry, or the pilots and the attendants, they're all very concerned about their health.
It might be... all commercial flights might be grounded in 15 years because we really don't know how high the cosmic rays will be during the next solar minimum after 25, but it could be off the charts. And according to the new solar forcing modeling, CMIP6 solar forcing paper, cosmic rays are going to be off the charts. So that is bad news for no one's going to Mars. Anyone still talking about going to Mars has not looked at the new science. I just saw a presentation by Dr. August Dunning at Observing the Frontier in February, and it is not a possibility. There are too many cosmic rays. If there's a solar outburst on the sun and you're on Mars, you're dead. It is going to fry you. You watch your hair and teeth fall out instantly. So bad news, any of you people thinking, any kids out there that want to go to Mars, it's not happening unless we discover how to shield cosmic rays, which probably is not happening.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's the number one concern is our entire, from the moment we wake, we're woken by our cell phone playing some little tune. We roll over, we check emails, we check stock numbers, we roll out of bed. We've turned knobs that some automation has prepared water for us. We microwave things. And I'm saying everything where I'm going at with this is that all of those steps that you go through in your day are made possible by technology that will not be here soon. And you wouldn't be listening here today if you didn't have an inkling that was true. And so let us assure you that your time is better spent planning for your escape from the city to some land where you can grow some food and live a real life than trying to get in another piece of technology and fly to another planet that has no atmosphere and it's full of technology that would also fry, and you would be dead and have nowhere to run to when you get there. So don't try to become an astronaut in the future. Try to become a human on the Earth.
That's well put. Scott, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. You saved me, and this has been a very enlightening conversation with our producer. Those of you that are nibbling the red pill and that are going to be listening to this on YouTube, Scott, as well as I, assure you that proper prior planning will prevent piss-poor performance in a future that no one can predict. But if you believe us and the science we've been forecasting is pretty much, as the mainstream releases their information matching what we're saying, that there is a very high probability that there are going to be some major Earth changes in your future involved in society. How that unfolds, I think we're actually going to be able to witness. Because of the way technology is set up, we're going to see the crop failures. Oppenheimer Ranch Project will continue to report on them. Ice Age Farmer, Adapt 2030, et al. Suspicious observers, we're going to continue to be citizen scientists and move the narrative forward into the truth spectrum. And we may debunk some conspiracy theories on the way, but that's not our point. Our point here is to motivate the masses to start preparing for what is inevitable. If let's say it comes in 15 years, I don't have to worry about that. That's 15 years. But what if it happens in 2 years? And you're not prepared, and it's too late. I foresee a future where all of the important things that we need to survive and thrive in the future, like generators, solar panels, batteries, at some point are going to rapidly rise in price and be well out of your reach to even have a burning light in your future. So the time is now to start preparing before the SHTF occurs. This is a whole shift in your mindset. You have to wake up to a new reality that may happen overnight. And I assure you, it is a better reality. It may be more difficult. It may take more moxie, but the human species have been through way worse. Learn from the past. If you're going to stay in place, dig a root cellar. It takes a weekend in your backyard. Learn how to fortify it and start stockpiling in there. You can cover it up and hide it from your neighbors. Play dumb. Go through scenarios that may occur in your head. What happens if all the power goes off tomorrow and everyone runs to the store? Do you run with them, or are you prepared to shelter in place forever? Do you have enough candles, matches, flammable things to, if it were to shut off tomorrow, could you make it for a year to figure out how to make it another year? There are ways to begin this, because I don't suggest it's going to happen soon. I think we have a few years to prepare. It will unfold before your very eyes. But if you want to survive and thrive in the future, the time is now to start planning. There are many things you can do. Scott suggested awesome things. Buy a cheap plot of land, vacation there, bring the family camping, plant some trees, learn how to grow food. We suggested the Worldwide Organization of Organic Farms USA at Wolf USA. All these links will be below the video on YouTube, so check them out. Do your homework. It doesn't cost you anything to start preparing for what will be, unfortunately. I hate to tell you the truth, but it's better now to hear the truth than for it to kick you in the butt all of a sudden overnight. Do you have any closing words, Scott, before we wrap up?
No, well, yes. What I'll tell people is, we can go and we can give you lists of things to do. There's 1,000 websites that can tell you how to prepare. That they can tell you how to approach it, what you'll need. You need this, this, and this. There's 1,000 of those. I think the message that we can give you here is here's the science that's backing up what you're actually seeing happening right now. And as it gets closer and closer to tipping your reality, then please open yourself up to stepping out of this technology world and stepping into a world where you can survive based on your own initiative.
Yeah, preparedness is the way of the future. I want to thank Scott McDonough, our producer, for joining us tonight for the final hour. It was an awesome conversation.